Every character is compelled by something. Character motivation is essential in making the conflict in a story feel real. Motivation is what gets our characters moving and helps the audience empathize with the wants and needs and desires. It's part of the process that helps immerse your audience in the story that you're telling, allowing them to suspend their disbelief and become invested in your characters. But most of us already know and understand that character motivation and creating compelling character motivation is important to a story. The more important question is, how do we create it? And what exactly is good character motivation? Welcome back to the Wrestling with Words podcast. My name is Cameron. I'm a writer, an editor, and your host. Here, we talk about all things related to writing and storytelling. And the goal is to help you tell better stories while also understanding how the best stories are told. A book, or rather a series of novellas that I think do a wonderful job at illustrating character motivation, is in the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. In it, the main protagonist, Murderbot, essentially their want and their desire and their goal is, in its barest of bones, to complete their mission and to not get killed or not let any of their clients get killed. But that's a pretty general and even common goal of a character or a protagonist. What makes this sort of a compelling character motive, or what exactly is compelling about that goal? Well, the compelling component comes down to their motivations, or the thing that motivates them to want to achieve that goal. And in the Murderbot Diaries, really their main motive is to be left alone, to watch their serials and watch their TV shows and reruns of their favorite movie. It's a interesting little quirk to a character where you wouldn't necessarily expect them to be just interested in watching television. In the simplest of terms, the what is that goal, whereas the why is the motivations. And most often, motivations, or answering that why does our character want what they want, or why do they have this goal in mind, turn out to be not just ways to enhance that goal, but also they enhance everything else around it, including the character. A highly sophisticated and dangerous security synthetic human who just wants to be left alone in their cubicle to watch entertainment and is incredibly introverted is a much more interesting character to see navigate some of these scenarios and the story in general. Both of the goal and the motivation for that goal can go into developing a character and moving the plot along. But it's that motivation that adds a bit more depth and allows us to better understand why a character is the way that they are and wants what they want. And when we go to think about our own characters and in our own stories, we are often faced with two different kinds of motivations. There are intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, internal versus external. Both serve their own purpose and feed into your story's conflict. Sometimes we are driven by external forces or pressures, and other times we are driven by something internal. These will depend on your story and will depend on the different characters that you have. But one thing that we can look at to sort of understand these external and internal motivations is by looking at the hierarchy of needs. This is a really great tool just to sort of conceptualize and see the different categories that we can pull from. I use this all the time as sort of a checklist or a way to sort of see where the conflict might come from and how a character might address that conflict. And even sometimes the priority of needs and desires. For the purpose of writing and storytelling, this is displayed in a triangle or a pyramid, but for your story and for whatever characters you're working on, you don't necessarily need to value one of these over the other. Now, for instance, if your character doesn't have food and water, or we're dealing with a post-apocalyptic setting, a lot of times they will sacrifice other needs on the pyramid, or they won't be deemed as important. But to name what each of these are, we have at the base, working up, we have first the sociological, being the basic necessities of survival. Following that is safety. This can be something from not just health and wellness, but this can be financial and even something like job security. Next is love and belonging. These will be the intimate relationships that your character might have, whether they are in a community, their friends, and their family. And then next we have esteem. This is usually in terms of how your character views themselves. This is their self-esteem, the respect, confidence, and even a sense of achievement. And then finally, there is the self-actualization. This is mostly the moral system that makes up your character. This can also be the creativity and even the purpose that they might feel. And all of these can help you better develop or understand what a character's own needs are. What are the things that motivates them? Or what is the thing that's motivating them internally or externally to achieve the goal that is in your story? Again, using the example of a post-apocalyptic story, probably the one that comes to mind will be the sociological needs, being security, food, and shelter. But it could also be safety, finding a secure place to live or start anew. But then there's other things like esteem and belonging. Maybe they are already part of a new community and they are having a hard time fitting in or finding a sense of family and community. They may be considered an outcast in this new world. And then there's the self-actualization. Perhaps the character in this scenario has gone against their own moral code or are faced with a situation where in order to survive, they have to break that moral code. It should be said, too, that motivations aren't always rational. Everybody in the real world or outside of your fictional setting are rational and irrational people. No matter how rational we think we are, there are certain things that we are just irrationally afraid of or irrationally desire. This can be someone that is already extremely wealthy, but irrationally they think that they need more wealth or they need more financial security. Similarly, you could also have someone who's in a committed and stable relationship, but irrationally they are afraid of being left or abandoned or broken up with. And personally, one of the things that I think are actually sometimes more interesting are those irrational motives, the things that we irrationally obsess over or irrationally drive us to a certain goal or a want. These often can be reflection points in your story, fulfilling different character arcs or self-reflection on your character's part. I think that we see villains a lot of times being given irrational motives. But I think that having a mix of both is always a little more interesting and can often make even heroic characters a bit more relatable and even realistic. And the final 2 points that I want to bring up when it comes to character motives and creating character motives are giving our cast of characters conflicting motives, and sometimes even giving our own or a single character conflicting motivations. And then as well, if or when we should clearly state the motives of a character. So first, talking about the conflicting motives, and if we should have characters or even our own, if it's a single character, giving them conflicting motives. Usually I say yes, almost always, as this can often be a great point to create tension and conflict. Now, the story's overall conflict and tension doesn't have to hinge on two different characters' motives. You could even have two characters who are on the same team that have conflicting motives. one character, using our post-apocalyptic world example, one character's motives or might be motivated by protecting their own family, whereas the other one is acting in the interest of the greater good of whatever their society is. We can see scenarios or different types of situations where maybe one character is protecting just their family over the rest of their colony or survival group. These motives, or at least these two, are in the same camp, but we can also play off of different motives, being different characters, maybe one wanting the security that comes with moving into a new location, but having to remove another group, whereas a different character sees it as wrong, so it conflicts with their moral agenda. Either way, we can use sort of this pyramid and even some of these broad motives or motivational forces to create tension, not just between an antagonist and a protagonist, but even amongst the cast of characters that are on the same side. This often creates a great deal of suspense and makes the characters deal with tough decisions, which in turn gives the reader or viewer or audience member something to consider as well. But it also comes down to what makes sense for your story. Depending on the genre or age group or any other factor, it may make more sense to have your characters align versus a opposing motive. And that sort of segues into the final point, being, should we clearly state the character's motives? And again, this one is an answer that might be unsatisfying, but it depends. It depends on your story. It depends on the characters, and it depends on how you want the narrative to unfold. Sometimes it's effective to clearly state whatever the motives are, but also sometimes it's very obvious what the motives are. Again, if we're using the post-apocalyptic survival scenario, it's pretty obvious that they need to find food and water and shelter. We don't need to have our characters clearly state that. That can sometimes be reflected just in the setting or in the characters interacting with one another. I have always kind of thought about this element as being similar to, or even a distant cousin of, showing versus telling. There is no universal right answer for showing and telling. Same thing with stating motives or having your characters clearly define what their motives are. It depends on the story, and it depends on your own writing style. As long as, when it comes to motives, as long as the level of ambiguity doesn't make it so that we have no idea what a character wants and why they want it, as long as the reader or the audience can envision or conceptualize why a character might be acting in that way or not acting in a certain way, then I would leave it up to you to decide what and how and for what reason a character wants what they want. Let me know what you're wrestling with. When it comes to character motives, is this something that comes easy, and do you use the hierarchy of needs, or have you ever used the hierarchy of needs in another way? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, thanks for watching and thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.